He found a mail-order bride at the train station without luggage and made her his everything. He went to the train station that morning because he had promised himself he would not back out. The decision had already been made weeks ago, written down in letters, signed by strangers, agreed upon by people who believed that life could be arranged if emotions were kept out of it. He told himself this was practical, this was sensible, this was how lonely people survived in a quiet town where time moved slowly and opportunities passed without knocking twice. The station was old and small, the kind where the paint peeled from the benches and the clock above the platform always seemed a few minutes behind. The air smelled of metal, dust, and cold wind. He stood near the edge of the platform, hands in his coat pockets, feeling out of place even though he had lived in this town his whole life. He kept looking at the clock, then at the tracks, then back at the people around him. Families waited with flowers. Workers stood with bags slung over their shoulders. A few couples laughed softly, already connected by shared history. He was different. He was there to meet a woman he had never seen in person. They had exchanged letters for months. The letters were polite, careful, and respectful. She wrote about wanting a new start. He wrote about having a steady job and a quiet home. There was no talk of deep feelings or promises of happiness. It was an agreement built on honesty, not romance. At least that was what he told himself. Still, as the train approached, his chest tightened in a way he hadn't expected. The train slowed with a loud hiss, metal grinding against metal. Doors opened. People stepped down one by one. He searched faces, trying to match them to the photograph he had received weeks earlier. The photo was small and faded, showing a young woman with serious eyes and a plain smile. He remembered thinking she looked tired but strong. Then he saw her. She stepped off the train carefully as if unsure the ground beneath her would hold. She wore a thin coat that looked too light for the weather. Her shoes were worn. Her hair was pulled back neatly, but strands escaped and moved with the wind. She paused, looking around the station with quiet caution, and she had no luggage. No suitcase, no bag, not even a small purse. At first he thought he was mistaken. He waited, watching to see if she would turn back to retrieve something, but she didn't. She simply stood there, holding her hands together, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar place. That was when he knew it was her. Something in her posture matched the tone of her letters, careful, hopeful, and afraid all at once. He walked toward her slowly, unsure what to say. He cleared his throat. When he spoke her name, she turned, startled at first, then relieved. She nodded, confirming who she was. Her voice was soft, careful with each word, as if she didn't want to say the wrong thing. They stood there for a moment, both unsure how to begin. People moved around them, reuniting and leaving, but they remained still, caught in an awkward pause. He finally offered a small smile and introduced himself, even though she already knew his name. She smiled back, polite and reserved. He wanted to ask about the luggage. The question pressed against his thoughts, but he didn't say it. Something told him that asking would open a door neither of them was ready to walk through yet. Instead, he gestured toward the exit and told her his car was parked nearby. She nodded and followed him without hesitation, as if she had already decided to trust him the moment she stepped off the train. As they walked, he noticed how light her steps were, how she carried herself as if she was used to not taking up space. The wind made her shiver, and without thinking, he removed his scarf and offered it to her. She hesitated, then accepted it with a quiet thank you that carried more meaning than the words themselves. The drive home was quiet. The road stretched ahead, lined with bare trees and empty fields. The radio played softly in the background. He glanced at her from time to time, careful not to stare. She looked out the window, absorbing everything, the houses, the signs, the unfamiliar sky. It was clear she was memorizing this place, as if afraid it might disappear. He wondered what kind of courage it took to leave everything behind, not just people and places, but certainty. To step into a new country with no bags, no safety net, and no guarantee that the person waiting would be kind. The thought made his chest feel heavy. When they reached his house, she paused at the doorway. It wasn't large, but it was clean and warm. A place built for one man who had never expected to share it. He told her she could take the spare room, that there was no rush, no pressure. She listened carefully, nodding, her eyes shining with relief. Inside, he showed her where the kitchen was, where the bathroom was, how the heater worked. He spoke slowly, choosing simple words, wanting to make sure she understood. She thanked him for everything, even the smallest things, as if kindness was something she wasn't used to receiving freely. That evening, they sat at opposite sides of the table, sharing a simple meal. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. He realized he didn't feel regret. Instead, he felt a strange sense of responsibility. Not the heavy kind, but the quiet kind that settles into your bones when you know someone's future is now tied to yours. Later, when she went to rest, he remained in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair she had just left. He thought about the train station, the moment he saw her standing there with nothing in her hands. He understood then that she hadn't arrived empty. She had arrived carrying hope, fear, and faith in a stranger. And without realizing it, he knew that meeting her that day was not just the start of an agreement. It was the beginning of a life that would slowly, quietly change him forever. The next morning began quietly. The house woke up slowly, just like the people inside it. He rose early, as he always did, following a routine built over many years of living alone. He made coffee, listening to the familiar sounds of the kettle and the ticking clock on the wall. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then he remembered that he was not alone anymore. He glanced toward the hallway, half expecting to hear movement. The spare room door was closed. He wondered if she had slept well, if the bed felt strange, if the silence of the house felt too loud for her. He did not want to disturb her, so he moved carefully, keeping his steps light. When she finally appeared, she looked unsure, as if she wasn't certain where she belonged yet. She had changed into clean clothes but still seemed careful, standing near the doorway with her hands folded. He greeted her with a calm good morning and offered her coffee or tea. She chose tea, smiling slightly, grateful for the simple choice. They sat at the table again, just like the night before. The sunlight coming through the window made the room feel warmer, softer. He noticed how she watched everything closely, how he poured the water where he placed the cups, how he moved around the kitchen. It was not curiosity alone, it was learning. She was trying to understand this new life piece by piece. Their conversation was slow. Words came carefully, sometimes stopping altogether when language failed them. Still, they managed. She asked about his work. He told her about his job, how it paid enough, how the days were steady and predictable. She nodded, listening closely, as if stability itself was something precious. Later, he offered to show her the town. He thought it might help her feel less trapped inside the house. She agreed, though her eyes showed a mix of interest and nervousness. Before leaving, she hesitated, looking down at her worn shoes. He noticed and quietly said they could stop by a store if she needed anything. She looked surprised, then gently said yes. As they walked through the town, he saw it differently than he ever had before. Streets he had known all his life now seemed new through her eyes. She paused often, looking at shop windows, signs, and passing people. Everything was unfamiliar, and yet she took it in with quiet strength. At the clothing store, she stayed close to him, clearly uncomfortable asking for anything. He told her to choose what she liked, that it was important she felt comfortable. She moved slowly through the aisles, touching fabrics, unsure. When she finally selected a few simple items, she apologized for taking too long. He shook his head and told her there was no hurry. For the first time, he saw a small hint of ease in her expression. On the way home, the silence between them felt different, less heavy, more natural. She thanked him again, her voice steady but emotional. He replied simply, telling her she didn't need to thank him for things that were normal. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if those words meant more than he realized. That afternoon, she offered to help around the house. He tried to tell her it wasn't necessary, but she insisted. She washed dishes carefully, folded laundry with precision, and cleaned as if she wanted to prove her value. Watching her, he felt something tighten inside him. He realized she was afraid of being a burden. That evening, as they shared dinner, she spoke a little more. She talked about liking quiet places, about enjoying simple meals. She did not speak of her past, and he did not ask. There was an unspoken agreement forming between them. Some stories would wait until trust was stronger. Days followed a similar pattern. He went to work. She stayed home, learning the rhythms of the house and the town. When he returned in the evening, she greeted him politely, sometimes with a shy smile. Slowly, the house began to feel less empty. The silence no longer echoed. It rested. One evening, he noticed her standing by the window, watching the sky darken. He asked if she was homesick. She thought for a long moment before answering. She said she missed familiarity, not places. She said she was used to letting go. The honesty in her voice stayed with him long after the conversation ended. They began taking short walks together after dinner. The town felt safer with time. Neighbors nodded in greeting. Some looked curious, but he paid them no mind. What mattered was that she walked a little more confidently each day, her steps no longer as hesitant. One night a storm rolled in. The wind rattled the windows and thunder filled the sky. He heard a soft knock at his door. When he opened it, she stood there, clearly shaken. Without asking questions, he invited her in and reassured her that the house was safe. She thanked him quietly and returned to her room. He stayed awake longer than usual that night, realizing how deeply he cared about her sense of safety. As the weeks passed, small changes became noticeable. She laughed once at something he said, surprised by her own sound. He smiled more without realizing it. They shared stories about small things, favorite foods, childhood memories that were safe to tell. Each shared moment added a thin thread of connection. He realized then that this was not what he had expected. He had planned for a simple arrangement, something practical, but what was forming between them was something built on patience and care. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people learning how to exist together. Late one evening, as they sat quietly with cups of tea, he thought about the train station again, about how she had arrived with nothing in her hands. He understood now that she was not empty. She was strong, careful, and quietly brave. And without either of them saying it out loud, something important was happening. Trust was growing, slowly, gently. Like a seed taking root in new soil, waiting for the right time to rise. Time began to move differently in the house. Days no longer felt separate and sharp, but connected, like beads on a string. He stopped counting weeks since her arrival because her presence had become part of the normal rhythm of life. The mornings started to feel warmer, even on cold days, and the evenings no longer carried the weight of loneliness. She woke earlier now, often before he did. He would hear soft movement in the kitchen, the quiet clink of a cup or the gentle sound of water running. At first, he worried she might feel pressure to take care of things, so he told her more than once that she didn't need to do everything. She always listened politely, but she also continued, not because she was forced, but because it gave her a sense of purpose. Doing something made her feel grounded. Her language skills improved little by little. She practiced by reading labels, listening to the radio, and asking careful questions. Sometimes she would pause mid-sentence, searching for the right word, her brows tightening in concentration. He never rushed her. He waited. When she finally found the word, her smile carried a quiet victory that made him proud in a way he didn't expect. They began to cook together. At first, the meals were simple, things he knew how to make. Then one evening she asked if she could cook something from her own background. She didn't have all the right ingredients, so she adapted, using what was available. The result was unfamiliar but comforting. As they ate, she watched his face closely, worried he might not like it. When he told her it was good and asked her to make it again someday, her eyes softened with relief. Through these small moments, something steady formed between them. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was built from shared routines, folding laundry side by side, cleaning the yard together, sitting quietly in the evenings while the radio played low. The house began to feel like a shared space rather than a shelter. He noticed changes in her too. Her shoulders were less tense. She walked more confidently, no longer shrinking into herself when outside. She began to speak more freely, offering opinions, even disagreeing gently at times. He welcomed it. It meant she felt safe enough to be herself. One afternoon, while sorting old boxes in the storage room, she came across a few of his childhood items. Simple things, old photos, school papers, a broken toy he had kept for no clear reason. She asked about them, and he found himself talking more about his past than he ever had with anyone. He spoke of growing up in the same town, of parents who worked hard, of learning early to depend on himself. She listened closely, not interrupting, her attention steady and sincere. In return, she began to share small pieces of her own story. Not the painful parts, but memories that felt safe, helping her family when she was young, learning to be careful with resources, dreaming of something better without knowing what that meant. He understood that trust was still forming, and he respected the boundaries she set. As spring arrived, they spent more time outdoors. The yard needed work, and they tackled it together. Dirt under their nails, sunlight on their faces, shared effort made them feel like a team. They laughed once when the hose sprayed unexpectedly, both startled. The sound of her laughter stayed with him long after the moment passed. Neighbors began to see them together more often. Some offered friendly greetings, others asked polite questions. She responded carefully but kindly, growing more comfortable with each interaction. He stood nearby, ready to step in if needed, but proud that she was finding her voice. One evening, after a long day, they sat on the porch watching the sky change colors. She spoke about wanting to learn more, to improve her language, to be useful beyond the house. He encouraged her, telling her she had time and support. Her face lit up at the word support, as if it was something new and precious. A few days later, she asked if they could open a small savings jar together. She wanted to contribute, even in small ways, once she found work or training. He was moved by her determination. They placed the jar on a shelf, a quiet symbol of shared future plans. There were difficult days, too. Moments when misunderstandings happened, when words came out wrong, when silence returned briefly. But instead of pulling away, they learned to talk through it slowly. He listened. She tried again. Each challenge passed without leaving scars. One night, as they cleaned up after dinner, she paused and thanked him, not in the way she used to, but with deeper meaning. She told him she felt human again. The words struck him deeply. He realized then how much weight she had carried when she arrived, even without luggage. Later, lying awake in his room, he thought about how much had changed. He had started this journey thinking of practicality, of filling an empty space in his life. What he had found instead was connection, purpose. A quiet partnership growing stronger with time. And though neither of them named it yet, what they were building had moved beyond arrangement. It was becoming something real, something chosen, something rooted in care, patience, and the steady belief that a better life could be built, one ordinary day at a time. The truth did not come all at once. It arrived slowly, like rain that begins with a single drop. He noticed the change in her before she spoke. She grew quieter in the evenings, her smile slower to appear. Sometimes she would sit staring at nothing, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When he asked if she was tired, she would say yes. When he asked if something was wrong, she would shake her head. He learned not to push. But he also learned not to ignore. One evening, winter returned unexpectedly. The air turned sharp and the house felt colder despite the heater. They ate dinner quietly. The radio stayed off. Afterward, she lingered at the table instead of cleaning up right away. He sensed that something was different. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and careful, as if each word had weight. She asked if they could talk. He nodded and sat back down, giving her his full attention. He did not interrupt. He did not rush her. He simply waited. She began by saying she had not told him everything. Her hands trembled slightly and she pressed them together to steady herself. She said she had been afraid, not of him but of the memories. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant silence. She told him about the place she came from, not with names or details but with feelings. She spoke of constant worry, of days spent choosing between needs. She spoke of loss, not just of things but of people, of responsibilities placed on her shoulders too early, of learning to endure without expecting help. As she spoke, he felt the room grow heavier, not with sadness alone but with respect. He saw her differently now, not just as a quiet woman learning a new life, but as someone who had carried more than anyone should have to. She explained why she arrived with no luggage. There was nothing left to bring. What little she had owned had been given away, sold, or left behind for those who needed it more. The journey itself had taken everything else. She said this without bitterness, just honesty. He listened, his chest tight, his thoughts racing. He wanted to say something comforting, but he knew that words would fall short. Instead, he stayed silent and present. Sometimes being there was more important than speaking. She continued, saying she had not expected kindness, not real kindness. She had prepared herself for difficulty, for distance, for being treated as an arrangement. What she had found instead confused her. It made her feel safe, and safety was something she had never learned how to accept. Tears fell then quietly. She did not sob. She did not break down. They simply came, steady and sincere. He moved closer, unsure if he should touch her. When she nodded, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried everything he could not say. That night changed something between them, not into romance or promises, but into understanding, the kind that deepens trust and removes walls. In the days that followed, she seemed lighter though tired. Speaking the truth had taken effort. He made sure to give her space, but also reassurance. He reminded her without words that she was not alone. They fell into a new rhythm, one shaped by honesty. She no longer hid her quiet moments. When memories weighed on her, she said so. He did not try to fix them. He listened. Sometimes they sat together in silence, sharing the weight without trying to lift it. He also began to notice his own changes. He was more aware, more patient. He thought before speaking. He paid attention to small details, whether she slept well, whether she ate enough, whether her eyes looked tired. Caring no longer felt like effort. It felt natural. One afternoon, she asked if she could volunteer at a local community center to practice the language and feel useful. He agreed immediately. He helped her prepare, walking her through what to expect. When she left that first day, nervous but determined, he felt a strange mix of pride and worry. She returned smiling. She told him about the people she met, the small tasks she helped with, the feeling of being needed. Her words came faster, more confident. He listened, realizing how important this step was for her sense of self. Weeks passed. Winter softened into early spring. The days grew longer. With each passing week, she stood a little taller. The house felt fuller, not with noise, but with life. One evening, while folding laundry together, she thanked him again. This time, she didn't say it for a meal or a favor. She thanked him for seeing her, for not asking her to be more than she was, for letting her heal without pressure. He answered honestly. He told her that her strength had changed him, that he had learned more about patience and care in these months than in years before. He admitted that he had expected a solution to loneliness. What he had found was connection. They sat quietly after that, letting the words settle. That night, as he lay awake, he thought about how fragile trust was and how powerful. He realized that love did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grew slowly, through shared truths and gentle understanding. And for the first time since meeting her at the train station, he no longer thought of her arrival as something unexpected. He thought of it as something necessary. The years that followed did not rush forward. They moved gently, shaped by choice rather than chance. Nothing about their life together looked dramatic from the outside. There were no grand moments that people would talk about later. Instead, there were ordinary days, repeated again and again, slowly building something strong. She continued going to the community center. At first, it was only a few hours a week. Then it became more regular. She helped organize supplies, assisted people who needed guidance, and practiced her language every chance she got. Each day she returned home with new stories. Small stories, but important ones. Stories about feeling useful, about being seen. He listened every evening, sometimes while cooking, sometimes while sitting quietly at the table. He never grew tired of hearing her voice grow more confident. It reminded him how far she had come. It reminded him how much strength can be hidden inside someone who arrives with empty hands. With time, she found part-time work. It was not easy and it was not perfect, but it was hers. The first day she received her pay, she held the paper carefully as if it might disappear. She placed part of it in the savings jar they had started together. Her smile that day stayed with him forever. The house changed too, slowly, without planning. She added small touches, a plant near the window, a cloth on the table, a warm light in the corner of the room. None of it was expensive. All of it made the space feel alive. What had once been just his house became their home. They learned each other deeply. He learned when she needed quiet and when she needed company. She learned when he needed rest and when he needed encouragement. Arguments were rare, but misunderstandings still happened. When they did, they talked. Not quickly, not with raised voices, but honestly. Trust became the foundation of everything. One evening, long after she had settled into her new life, they returned to the same train station, not for a journey but for a walk. The station looked the same, old benches, peeling paint, the clock still slightly behind. She stood on the platform where she had once arrived. This time she held his hand. She told him she remembered that day clearly. The fear, the cold, the uncertainty. She told him she had believed her life would be small and quiet. She had not expected happiness. He listened, feeling the weight of that moment. She turned to him and said that what he had given her was not just shelter or safety. It was dignity, choice, time to become herself again. He did not answer right away. He simply squeezed her hand. As the years continued, people in town stopped seeing her as a stranger. She became known for her kindness, her reliability, her quiet strength. She built friendships slowly, carefully. Each one meant something to her. Each one proved that her place in the world was no longer fragile. He changed too. He became more open, more connected. His life no longer felt narrow or predictable. It felt full, not busy, full. He realized that loving someone did not take away freedom. It expanded it. They never spoke much about the arrangement that had brought them together. It no longer mattered. Labels had lost their meaning. What mattered was what they had chosen day after day. One quiet afternoon, sitting together in the yard, she rested her head against his shoulder. There was no ceremony, no announcement, but both of them understood. This was their life, shared, steady, real. Looking back, he sometimes thought about that first moment at the train station. The woman standing alone without luggage, the fear he had felt, the uncertainty. Now he understood. She had not arrived with nothing. She had arrived with courage. And together they had turned that courage into everything.